In October 1973, war broke out in the Middle East. Egyptian and Syrian forces attacked Israel. The United States decided to support Israel, and that decision turned into long lines of people waiting for hours at gas stations. The oil cartel formed by Gulf nations, known in short as OPEC, declared an embargo and cut off oil exports to the U.S. and the West. Prices quadrupled. People couldn't get fuel. Factories shut down production. The Western economy shook for the first time in its history. In this video, we will talk about how, in the wake of this crisis, a 2-hour meeting at a single table completely transformed the economic future of the world. To understand 1973, we need to go back 2 years earlier. That year, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a decision that would go down in history as the Nixon shock. He dismantled the system that tied the dollar to gold. Let's go a little further back in history. The Bretton Woods Agreement, signed in 1944 after World War II, brought a new order to the world. The foundation of that order was this: 1 ounce of gold was worth exactly $35. All other currencies were pegged to the dollar. The dollar, in other words, acted as a proxy for gold. This system served as the cement of Western economic stability for 30 years. But the U.S. was being crushed under the staggering costs of the Vietnam War and the burden of domestic social programs. They were forced to print money. As they printed, the dollar lost its value, and other countries began to realize that the gold backing their dollars was no longer sitting in the vault. French President de Gaulle sent a shipload of dollars and demanded gold from the U.S. Germany did the same. The system was starting to break down. In 1971, Nixon said, "We are no longer exchanging dollars for gold," and closed the door. Bretton Woods was over, and the whole world began to wonder, if the dollar is no longer backed by gold, why should we hold dollars at all? Right in the middle of this chaos, the 1973 crisis exploded. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated attack on Israel. The U.S. provided military aid to Israel. The Arab members of OPEC were furious. On October 17th, they deployed oil as a deterrent weapon against the U.S. and all Western nations that stood by Israel. An embargo. They cut daily oil production by 5%, and they announced they would keep cutting every month. The result was sudden and jarring. The price per barrel jumped from $3 to $12. Gas lines formed across the U.S. Sunday driving was banned across Europe. Toilet paper stockpiles ran dry in Japan. People rushed to hoard everything they could, but the real message was this: Western industrial civilization was connected to a pipeline running out of the Middle East, and control of that pipeline was in someone else's hands. The crisis ended in March 1974. The embargo was lifted. Prices retreated somewhat. But the Nixon administration was asking itself, if this happens again, what do we do? This is exactly when Henry Kissinger stepped onto the stage. Kissinger was, at the time, both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. He was a master of foreign policy, and he saw this crisis not merely as a problem, but as a geopolitical opportunity. Kissinger wanted to sign a secret deal with Saudi Arabia because the Saudis were the largest producers within OPEC. Bringing them to his side meant changing the entire equation, and the Saudi royal family was already uneasy about communist and Soviet influence spreading through the region. The Saudis needed security. The U.S. needed a steady oil supply. In early 1974, William Simon from the Treasury Department flew to Riyadh. Negotiations continued for weeks, even months, and eventually an agreement was reached. The details of the deal were as follows. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in dollars. and it would invest the dollars earned from oil revenues into U.S. Treasury bonds, meaning it would send that money back to America. In return, the U.S. would provide military guarantees, weapons sales, and political support. It would also remain silent against any counterattack targeting the Saudi regime. The agreement was signed in 1974, and by order of the Treasury Department, it was kept in the archives for 40 years. Some of the documents came to light in 2016, thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request filed by Bloomberg. As a result of this agreement, before long, other OPEC members joined the same system. Oil could now only be traded in dollars, and that simple fact carried enormous implications for global finance. Think about it. Every country in the world needs oil, and if they want to obtain oil, they first have to obtain dollars. What does that mean? Every country's economy must continuously demand dollars to keep functioning. Dollar demand never falls. And the U.S., for this very reason, can keep printing money, while also exporting the resulting inflation to everyone else. Economists call this the exorbitant privilege. But the second part of the story gets even more interesting. Petrodollar recycling. Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states export oil and earn billions of dollars, but they can't spend all of that money within their own economies. Their populations are small, their domestic markets limited, so they invest their dollars in U.S. Treasury bonds. The result, the U.S. secures cheap oil and can easily finance its budget deficit with money flowing back from the Gulf. The Gulf states, in turn, receive security guarantees and park their money in the world's safest treasury. The cycle looks perfect. The petrodollar system became one of the world's most powerful economic models within a few decades, but it had its fragile points, of course. First, the system required the U.S. to stand behind Gulf regimes under all circumstances. This occasionally came at serious political costs. The 1979 Iranian Revolution shook the U.S.'s regional balance. The Gulf War required a military buildup in Saudi Arabia, and according to some analysts, this system is still one of the reasons the U.S. has never been able to fully withdraw from the region. Second, the system is built on sustained demand for oil, and the question of what happens when oil becomes less relevant has increasingly become a subject of concern. Third, and perhaps most critically, rival powers are trying to circumvent the system. China, Russia, and the BRICS nations have been working for years to find an oil trade system outside the dollar. In 2023, Saudi Aramco accepted yuan for some of its sales to China. What appeared to be a minor commercial arrangement sent major shockwaves through the financial world. Iraq had tried to break out of the system. So had Libya. Both are in ruins today. If this agreement had not been signed in 1974, the dollar, which had lost the gold standard in 1971, could never have retained the value it holds today. Its status as the global reserve currency is not a coincidence. It is the direct consequence of the decision made at that table. The deal struck at Kissinger's table has endured for 50 years. If you found answers to your questions, wonderful. Keep listening to Wallet Historian, and I'll keep searching for answers.